former Pentagon official Lou Elizondo, who actually worked on an official U.S. government UFO program to study UFOs and UAP, has recently come out and done an interview in the media on the NewsNation channel, as well as on the Joe Rogan podcast. So in this video, we're going to look at what's over 3 hours of interviews with Lou Elizondo, and I'm going to share with you the key points that I pulled out reading between the lines so we can kind of analyze and evaluate this recent information. If you follow the UFO UAP topic, you'll have known Elizondo recently released his book, is now appearing on these bigger interview platforms like Ross Coulthart on NewsNation and Joe Rogan. So there is some very interesting information and some other kind of side information that I'm going to just share, highlight. We'll play some clips here. I got some clips lined up from the two different interviews. We'll start with the NewsNation interview. And so just to start here, I'm actually just going to play the first minute of the NewsNation interview with Lou Elizondo. And we'll pause it and we'll go from there. So here we go.
He was a Pentagon insider, a veteran, an investigator, and today he's quite possibly the most important voice in the modern UFO movement.
I'm doing nothing more than finishing the job I was given.
Lou Elizondo risking his career, his family, and possibly his life to tell the story of what the American government really knows about alien craft
And it's responsive and reactive.
alien life.
There's zero information to suggest what they are doing is for benevolent reasons.
And the people in the Pentagon trying to hide the truth from you. There are forces, powerful forces, that don't want this story told.
And they'll go to great lengths to keep it a secret.
If aliens exist, where do they come from?
You know, people always say, well, these things are clearly from outer space. And I say, let's hold off on that.
What have they done to people?
Some of these people were very seriously injured.
And what do they want?
Hopefully they're not like us.
Tonight, you'll hear.
Okay. And obviously you can go and see the whole 42-minute interview there on NewsNation's YouTube channel called Confessions of a UFO Hunter. And so, yeah, some quick notes on that first. But which I think is important, right? NewsNation goes with the dramatic introduction. And, you know, what I think was particularly interesting to me there was that they went with the fear and threat theme pretty clearly. To their credit, they do give the government cover-up part, which is like enticing. I don't know if they're just going for the most kind of intrigue for their viewers and entertainment, but also it raises my eyebrows a little bit because I think in the past I've seen some things like Ross Coulthart kind of playing that line of like the fear and the threat, you know, and I know that the media pumps us with fear all the time. And I think that's part of the control mechanism of the powers that be who are really controlling the society. And so they're pumping with fear, you know, and this topic is no different. And, you know, it's very interesting to me that right there in the first 30 seconds, those editors chose the clip for Lou to say, there is zero evidence that what they're doing is benevolent. You know, it's like, oh, you know, immediately just strikes you like they're an enemy, you know, they're a threat, right? So it gives me a little bit of a red flag because it's like, okay, we're going to have disclosure, or is it going to be like this controlled disclosure where we're kept in that place of fear and a threat? So anyway, I thought that was interesting. Now I'm going to go to about 3 minutes in here. And I do just want to give you a little bit of extra context on Elizondo, which they'll talk about in the interview if you go watch the whole thing. But all right, real quick, basically, who was this guy, right? Okay, you can you can get full information about this by these two books, which is from Dr. James Lukatsky. And okay, in 2008 to 2010, the government, because of a couple of senators led by the Senator Harry Reid, they actually got funding, $22 million, to actually set up a scientific, totally legitimate group and program to study UFOs. And it was directed by someone named James Lukatsky, who wrote these two books you see here, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon and Inside the U.S. Covert Government UFO Program. And so you can get all the information about that there. And that was called AWSAP, AAWSAP, Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems, whatever the acronym is, right? And Advanced Aerospace Weapons. Now, within that, they had another department or program or sub-project called AATIP, AATIP, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And that is where Lou Elizondo was asked to run that by Lukatsky. And in both NewsNation and the Joe Rogan, for the first time I'm hearing it, and I guess it's in his book, he's overtly saying, yes, Dr. James Lukatsky brought me to his office and asked me to do this. So that's just some quick context if you like don't know who this guy is or you've just seen him pop up and whatnot. So anyway, let's shoot over here to this next clip that I'm going to play here, and we'll pause and comment on it.
Aliens, non-human intelligences, are real, and they have been engaging with humanity.
Ross, we're not alone. We are not alone in this universe, and it is a simple fact. And the U.S. government has been aware of that fact now for decades.
So I just think it's an interesting point. You may have seen that clip before, because Ross Coulthart like keeps pressing him to like say yes when he's like, okay, aliens, non-human intelligence exist and are here. And instead of Elizondo saying, you know, yes, he kind of defaults there to Ross, we're not alone. And all right, maybe that was just his way of answering the question, but maybe it was just him being very careful, like in terms of legal terminology, and just it's easier to say we are not alone. Maybe he was trained to do that by his legal team, but also it's like, why would you be vague like that? Because that's open for interpretation. We are not alone. You know, if someone asks you, okay, you're this insider government person, so, you know, non-human intelligence, aliens are here and they're engaging with us, and you could be clear and say, yes, they are. But instead you go, we are not alone. And that's known. That's open for interpretation. So I'm just saying, you know, I'm just saying there. I think that's something worth looking at. So we're going to pause from the clips for a second here. And we're at about 8 minutes. All right. Yeah. Time flies by here. I really try to keep these to like, I think 20 to 30 minutes is a great length, but there's just so much information within this. So we'll see where this goes today here. I hope you'll stick with me. Everything in here, I think, is definitely very useful. And let me just pull my notes over here. So I'm going to show you my notes from this, kind of like the timestamps and whatnot. And we'll play some of them. So we're still on the NewsNation here. And, you know, they go in to talk about the Karis Brazil cases, which I think is an important thing to notice, right? You've heard George Knapp talk about the Karis Brazil cases. And he spoke about them in a way where they're like very disturbing and dark and like threatening and scary. Like, holy crap, what are these aliens doing to people? That is clear from Knapp that that's what the Karis thing's about. And Ross, in Lou Elizondo, in both NewsNation and Rogan, he mentions these Karis Brazil cases. So that's clearly a part of his testimony, clearly a part of his what he's coming forward with. And that's important to keep in mind. We'll circle back to that. An interesting little note here is that I've never heard of before. Maybe you could let me know if you have. But you know, you hear all this stuff about Roswell. I've heard that there were 3 craft that actually crashed. That seems to be somewhat of a consensus in a lot of ufology in the literature, is that there was more than 1 crash. And I think, you know, most have nailed it down to 3. You know, Stan Friedman went pretty deep on that. You've got Kevin Randall and Don Schmidt kind of doing the most thorough work, it seems, on the Roswell crash incidents. Roswell's still like, I don't know what Roswell was still, honestly. I don't think it's like a shoe-in, like, okay, it was definitely aliens crash, but that's one of the things that Lou Elizondo's come forward and saying, apparently in his book Imminent, and with, you know, the information in his testimony he's giving in these interviews. But what he says here is that there was 2 craft at Roswell and that one flew away and one crashed. I've never heard them say that one of these craft flew away. First time I've ever heard that. You've probably seen a lot of other UFO channels have been covering this. Elizondo does confirm, you know, he had information about abductions. And actually, this is pretty significant. Hard evidence, according to him, of implants, right? And he describes these implants as that were taken out of soldiers by army and military doctors who testified and confirmed officially that they were some type of technology that were sheathed in a biological material, almost to like make the body kind of accept it. And also apparently when they were trying to excise this implant out, it like moved away and tried to avoid the doctor's instruments. So pretty wild. But again, it's I mean, look, we need the full truth, right? Even if it's freaky and, you know, messed up. But again, it's like everything that's coming out is kind of like scary for the average person. But anyway, they move on to talk about the consciousness aspect and about psychic abilities and that connection to UFOs, which is very interesting that that's going to be part of Lou Elizondo's testimony, you know, as a whistleblower or whatever, however you want to kind of conceptualize his role in the UFO topic. So let's come back. Let's come over here and we're going to look at the next clip now, which is actually going to be all the way up here. All right, let's take a listen.
Elizondo argues that people with enhanced chordate putamen might have a talent both for remote viewing and communicating with UAPs. And that's important because it's an established fact that the Pentagon has had an interest in remote viewing for military purposes.
In the vernacular, they used to call it psychic espionage. There was a program in the U.S. government, it's called Stargate. They were taking young soldiers and civilians, and they were training them to conduct espionage behind enemy lines. And the term was called remote viewing. A lot of people that were in the remote viewing program had MRIs done of their brains, and a vast majority have that specific morphology. Do I think it's extraordinary? No, it may be a vestigial capability that humans had for a long time.
But does it work?
Oh, it absolutely works. It absolutely works.
See,
So I think that's pretty important. I think this is one of those things with the whole UFO UAP subject that's like on the periphery, but it's like as crazy, if not crazier, than, you know, the idea of spaceships coming from somewhere else and, you know, they're having intelligent beings that are in them and that are interacting, and that the government's been covering this up. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's like, it's crazily fascinating and, you know, reality and civilization altering, but also this idea that we have this remote viewing ability and that it's already been proven scientifically that it works and it's been used by the military, you know. And yeah, I don't know if you've probably heard of remote viewing. If you haven't, I mean, it's literally you being able to close your eyes and go see what's going on visually somewhere else that's at a different location and a different time even. And this works apparently. And here's Elizondo again saying that, yes, it's absolutely real. You know, this is huge. I mean, that is crazy. And what else is known about? And if you read between the lines, if you heard the one interview that, again, Dr. James Lakatsky, who directed the OSAP program, if you listen to his one interview he did with Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp on Weaponized, he, you know, said that. He said the crazier thing of all this is the human abilities that we don't even know we have. So I think that's pretty important to keep in mind. And it's kind of cool to see Lou Elizondo mentioning that. So, and actually he goes on to say that he himself was trained in remote viewing, but that he doesn't like to talk about it. They do mention the Hitchhiker effect, which you can read about in the Skinwalkers at Pentagon book, which is this kind of freaky phenomenon where like people who have these experiences, it sometimes lingers and will actually kind of like go and like haunt their home and stuff. You can read all about that in Skinwalkers of the Pentagon book, but Elizondo says that him and his family experienced this as well, which is kind of weird. Now, we're going to move on here to the Nimitz encounter. Of course, the Nimitz encounter is the Tic Tac, right? There was the video. This happened in 2004. It was part of the release in the New York Times 2017 article. This is Commander David Fravor, right, who testified before Congress last year. They saw this white Tic Tac shaped craft that came from 80,000 feet, dropped down to above the water in like seconds, buzzed, flew around. And I mean, David Fravor was like flying the plane looking at this. There was multiple other witnesses. There was other data that confirmed that the object was there. And this is the case really that kind of propelled the 2017 to now for the government to take this seriously and for the Pentagon to have to answer, and why we have things like Arrow, we have things like the UAP task force. So this is a pretty important case. Now, they start talking about this, and I'm just going to play this little part of that here in him asking him about the Tic Tac. And then I'm going to just share some information to leave the discussion open. So let's check it out.
This Tic Tac looking object, roughly about the same length of a F-18 fuselage, performing in ways that we still can't replicate, bouncing around up and down.
So this is an intelligent technology.
This is absolutely, and it's responsive and reactive.
And it's not human.
It's not ours.
Though
that little part right there, okay? Talking about the Tic Tac, right? Now, Fravor was questioned at length in the hearings, and, he said, I don't know what this is. I don't know anything human that it could possibly be. I don't know anything with our physics, our known physics, that this could be. But I saw the thing, and it was intelligent. It reacted to us and so forth. Plus, there was something going on in the ocean where Fravor seems to imply this thing was like kind of returning to or like operating from, like something under the ocean. And anyway, you have other people, for example, Stephen Greer and Michael Schratt, who through their research, they have argued and posited that the Tic Tac UFO is actually a man-made UFO. That's one of the top secret UFOs that have been, the knowledge of which has been withheld from the U.S. government, from Congress, and have been operated out of some of these leading aerospace companies, which we're going to get to that soon, because Elizondo is the first one I've seen publicly call them out as an official whistleblower and so forth, and official U.S. Insider to call out these companies. So Stephen Greer and Michael Schratt say that the Tic Tac is an object that's made by Lockheed Martin, and that these are actually is a human-made object. And I don't know if they're right, but I'm just presenting to you their argument and information here to contrast that with what other people say. Someone very important right now, like Lou Elizondo, in the whole disclosure movement. And basically, Michael Schratt, here's his drawing of it. And this is the crux of their argument, is that this was seen and reported in the 1960s in Pennsylvania, I believe it was. And this is how the craft was described. And it had these little kind of tentacle things, but it had, these rivets and bolts and stuff that in Michael Schratt's argument and Stephen Greer's argument, that would indicate that it was a human-made experimental craft, an early kind of anti-gravity craft that they were messing around with, and not in a non-human intelligence, alien, ET, however you want to call it, craft, which are usually, purportedly described as being smooth and not seeing any rivets, seams, or bolts and things. So they use that. And then they also say there are other evidence for why they think the Tic Tac is man-made by Lockheed Martin is another witness testimony of an alleged whistleblower. And this is Michael Strat's drawing. And allegedly, this whistleblower who came to Stephen Greer's disclosure project and gave this information said when he was working at one of these top secret facilities, he caught a glimpse of this Tic Tac like craft being loaded out of one of the airplanes. And that was in 1991 that allegedly happened. So look, I mean, I think it's just worth seeing what everyone's saying, because at the end of the day, what do we really know, being the general public? And maybe the Tic Tac, maybe it was some crazy like anti-gravity craft that, Lockheed Martin or some private group has, and maybe they were messing with Fravor and the Navy that day, or maybe they were just, it was bad timing with whatever they were doing that day. Maybe it's even deeper than that. I don't know, man. Maybe that was them showing themselves for some reason. Maybe it really is non-human, off out of this world. But I think it's just good that we look all around there. Now, my criticism here of that exchange was that, Ross says, as we'll play it again here.
This is absolutely, and it's responsive and reactive, and it's not human. It's not ours.
It's like, okay, why is Ross like, he's not really even asking there, like, do you know that it's not a human craft? He's like, it's like a rhetorical question. He's like, and it's not humans. And then Elizondo says it's not ours. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm just saying, like, he didn't say like, through our studies of this case, we are able to determine with high confidence that it's not human made. He just says it's not ours. Okay, who is ours? Who's us, right? It's not the U.S. government's. Maybe it's, private illegal projects that have been kept out of the oversight of Congress, which is the whole thing that David Grusch is arguing is happening with this whole UFO issue. So that is the highlights from the NewsNation interview. And kind of just like on a summary note here, overall, actually, I'm sorry about that. We are not done. I guess I just didn't bring up these other clips because we're just going to talk about them. Right. Okay. It's important stuff. All right. Everything here is like worth, I had to whittle it down as best I could. So, Elizondo does go on to say like they could be from the oceans, right? Which is what I think is going to be part of the information that he comes out with. And he goes on to actually very interestingly talk about how they've figured out and hypothesized that they could use electromagnetic pulse technology to interfere with the UAP and try to bring them down, what he calls like a honey trap. And ATIP proposed an operation that they called Operation Interloper to try to trap the UAP. And it was approved, quote, by a lot of people, a lot of agencies. But then when it got to the top, Elizondo says that it was shut down. And he says, perhaps because they didn't want us to have the answers. This is important because here he's saying, yes, in between 2008 and 2018, whenever exactly this happened, they were like legitimately like, oh, we could try to like knock these things down. And then you look at the stories, like that's one of Stephen Greer's and the Disclosure Project's main arguments is that these have been being knocked down from the sky actually since the late 40s. And that's when the reverse engineering started. David Grusch's testimony, he said these are vehicles that were either landed or crashed. And the way he says it is like they were crashed, not they crashed, right? They were landed or crashed. And, it's just interesting, right? Like, is he talking about that in the crash retrieval programs? Are they crashing because they're being interfered with and brought down? Now, I know that can be something people argue against that, say if they're so advanced, how could they let that happen? Yes, I think that's a legitimate question, but at the same time, we don't know. We don't have the answers. Maybe we can. And then you've heard really out there claims, for example, from like Michael Herrera, who's allegedly a whistleblower who came from the Greer Disclosure Project. He's also been on some other channels. I mean, people are divided over whether he's just totally BSing or if he really saw something and, you know, has had some contact with some insiders. But, you know, he claims that they use certain gifted psychic people to actually kind of like lure the crafts closer, and almost trap them in that way. I don't know if there's anything real to that, but as we saw, and as we'll see in the Rogan interview as well, the consciousness interaction with the UAP is according to Elizondo, is a very real thing. So anyway, here in the yellow here, you can see this is like one of the big bombs, I think, from Elizondo. And this is in his book. I haven't read the book yet. Probably will, but I don't know. Maybe I won't. I'd like to, but there's already a lot of information from these interviews. But anyway, I mean, look, this is huge, actually, in my opinion. He names these companies, and we've heard them all in the UFO lore and literature: Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, TRW, Boeing, Raytheon, BAE Systems, and the Aerospace Corporation. And this is big, you know. I mean, this is bold. This is probably maybe like the ballsiest thing from his information, because like, yo, that's crazy. He's coming out with a book, you know, not only saying that he ran this program in the government, but also saying that these companies have the crashed UFO materials and body materials and are involved in covering this up from the government. So like, how are they going to respond, you know? And they are clearly the ones that are holding the secret, whoever's at the top of these companies, and they're clearly the ones with the power. So like, that's really bold, man. Like, what are they going to do? If we had real reporting, you know, we'd already have investigative journalists getting official comments from Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, like, hey, do you know that Lou Elizondo, who's a bona fide former director of a government's UFO program, you know, he said that you have secret programs with crashed UFOs. Is that true? You know, like, I haven't seen anybody doing that yet. I mean, I wish that people would. This story should be the biggest story out there. I do have a note here, though, when Ross kind of presses him about this, he says, like, and so these companies are involved in these UFO crash retrieval programs. And again, Elizondo dodges around the question, which again, it might just be how he's been advised to answer legally, but it's also just, I don't know, you know, like, listen to it and watch for yourself. That's at 25 minutes. And instead of saying, yes, we discovered that these companies are involved and are hiding it from the government, he says, it's true that it's in my book. Yeah. You know, it's like, I don't know. Anyway, even better, even more so than just the crashed UFOs. Later on, he says that the biological samples from these crafts were at one point kept at Fort Detrick, and then even at the FDA, which is weird to me, the Food and Drug Administration, and have been moved around a lot. The Department of Health and Human Services and the National Institute of Health. These are all allegedly places where alien bodies have been, according to Lou Elizondo, who's now coming public with these claims. And he said when he was running ATIP and wanted to get access to look at this stuff, they were denied access. Now, saying they were denied access is different than saying they were told there was none. So if they really denied access, that implies that they really have something. Again, journalists should be now pressing the FDA and all these other departments and saying, this former Pentagon director said that you have alien bodies, materials, and that you denied the ATIP program. Is that true? I don't see that happening. And he does go on to say that the deeper that they went, they were met with fierce resistance and, some interesting stuff to do a little deeper research on. They talk about a group called the Collins Elite, which is this small group, a cabal of religious fanatics inside the Pentagon who kind of do gatekeeping on information. And Elizondo says that group is alive and well, and I've encountered elements of that group. He says that him and people within ATIP were threatened to be killed. Quote, they told him, quote, if you're not careful, we're going to do exactly to you what we did with the Rosenbergs. You're done. I don't know the reference he's talking about there with the Rosenbergs, but yeah, he was threatened with his life. And David Grusch said the same about this cover-up program or programs. David Grusch said the same under oath, that people were harmed, killed, or threatened about this. So, yeah, as the interview goes on, we learned about Lou Elizondo resigning. He then resigned after apparently 10 years working at ATIP. And, my note is like, look, I mean, he worked 10 years at ATIP. So that's a long time. David Grusch did 4 years at the UAP task force. But Elizondo, 10 years running a program to try to study about UAP. And, OSAP only lasted 2 years. So that's pretty interesting. That makes him a pretty unique whistleblower / witness. They went on to made his life hell, him and his family. Those are the claims. His wife talks about it on the interview. Then he joins To the Stars Academy. That's with Tom DeLonge. And Air Force OSI actually opened a criminal investigation against Elizondo when the videos were released in the 2017 New York Times article, but they found that he was actually innocent. And here's real interesting as we wrap up the NewsNation interview here. The fact that after all this, right, him going through, first of all, apparently he wanted to release his book Imminent, that just came out. He wanted to release it years ago, but he's been going through this process at the Department of Defense's DOPSR program, which is this review process where if you want to publish, if you worked in the military, the government, Department of Defense, whatever, and you want to print a book about things that you experienced, they review and they tell you what you can and what you can't say. And if you publish that, you'll face legal consequences. And then they give it back to you. All right. So he went through all that, right? And look, like we said at the beginning of the video, he has claimed multiple times now that he directed this program, ATIP, which was within OSAP. He's now come out and said that James Lukatsky hired him to do it. We know James Lukatsky is legitimate because nobody has attempted, the Pentagon has never attempted to say he didn't run OSAP. So there's many opportunities for people to come out and say Lou Elizondo never did that, right? This is what's mind-boggling about, probably maybe more than anything about this whole Elizondo information, is that the Pentagon has publicly denied that Elizondo was the head of ATIP. And they denied it, quote, this is from Coulthart, directly to NewsNation for this report. So even just a few days ago, whenever they did this interview recently, the Pentagon still to this day is denying that Lou Elizondo ever was the head of ATIP. What are they trying to accomplish with that? My notes here. That's crazy. What's their strategy? Why would DOPSR, which is within the Pentagon, why would they approve his book? And why wouldn't they say, no, you're not allowed to go say that you were the head of ATIP because it's not true? It's wild, man. And then you had Senator Reid, thankfully, shortly before he passed away. That's, again, remember, that's the senator that began the 2008 OSAP UFO program in the government. That was never known about until the New York Times article, information leaked, right? Otherwise, we would have never known about it. What else goes on that we never hear about or know about? But Harry Reid wrote a letter in 2021 stating for the record that Elizondo did work at ATIP or was the head of ATIP, his role, whatever it was. Okay. So it's just crazy, you know. And they do finalize the interview by Elizondo saying, you know, point blank that Kirkpatrick is being dishonest. That's the former head of ARO. That's the former head of ARO, Sean Kirkpatrick. He does tell us that there'll be more public hearings. He's been asked to testify, and he said that he will. And, you know, it says disclosure isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. And the next generation is where he thinks real disclosure will occur. So, yeah, obviously, when we do get that next hearing, I mean, you got to bring Lou Elizondo up there. You got to bring James Lukatsky up there. I would think that would be like 1-2, right? You should bring, you know, Thomas Wilson up there, Admiral Wilson, who said he was denied access and then eventually saw something that was not made by human hands. That's according to the Wilson notes, the Wilson Davis notes, right? Which is the memo about that is in the congressional record. That was from the 2022 UAP hearing. So again, we'll see. And you know, in the bigger picture, I think that even though, you know, I have my hesitations about Lou Elizondo because I don't know him and I don't know any of these people. And there are some things, you know, while most will just either take a simple side to go back to like the Stephen Greer thing, right? And Greer years ago said that Elizondo's like not being fully honest or is like compromised by the like secrecy group or whatever. And so probably most people will just either go, oh, Greer said it, so I believe that, or the other side and go, oh, he's, you know, just stirring up conflict and is wrong. But, you know, I just take an approach of just like, it's just data, you know. He said it, right? Danny Sheehan, who's one of Lou Elizondo's lawyers, Danny Sheehan was the lawyer for the Disclosure Project, Stephen Greer's group, for 20-something years, okay? And it was this issue, Sheehan representing Elizondo, that broke up their relationship. And Sheehan no longer represents Stephen Greer in the Disclosure Project. So could it just be Stephen Greer having like a huge ego and being like a narcissist? Yes, it could be that. But, or I don't know, maybe there's something he knows that we don't know. I mean, he certainly has closer contact to these types of witnesses and people making these claims and claiming to have this experience than I do. So I think the fact that he said that is significant data, and that's it, right? Is like, I think it should be left on the table. You know, he didn't say anything like that about David Grusch. If you listen to everything Stephen Greer has said about David Grusch, he never said, this individual is, you know, I have reason to believe that he's compromised or is working for, you know, another group that has like a kind of agenda for disclosure. He didn't say that about David Grusch. He has said it about Elizondo, and, you know, Sheehan broke up with the Disclosure Project because he was representing Elizondo. So I don't know. It's something to think about. So aside from that, right, I do think that it's important. His story and him coming forward is important and valuable no matter what, because, you know, he's a bona fide example of someone who worked as an official U.S. government UFO investigator. And, you know, he is coming out and saying point blank, and this is more important than whatever his claims are, right, is he's saying that he was stonewalled, right? He was blocked, threatened, that there's definitely a cover up, and that these are real things going on. And so the fact for that to come out, and if the media were to do a good job of, I mean, this should be a front page story and everyone should learn about this, right? But it's not, because the media is compromised by whoever is pulling the strings behind the pyramid and keeping the lid on whatever the truth is about the UFOs. So it's good that he's coming forward regardless of if, he's being used, or unknowingly or something, or knowingly even. But I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. He's coming out and giving us this information that someone is covering up something. And that's all we need to know to keep pushing this forward. All right. So that is the NewsNation interview. And like I said, wow, a lot of information. You can see here that we have a whole section on Rogan. So to make this a little more digestible, I think we're going to end it there. Okay. We'll make this video strictly just about the NewsNation interview. And then I'll do another video about the Rogan interview, which there are some other nuances to the information in the exchanges and reading between the lines in the Joe Rogan interview that Elizondo does. So hope you got some value from all this. I know a lot of information, but this is like a pretty important step, I think, in this whole process. And I think we should always be reading between the lines, keeping everything on the table. Ultimately, we got to come to our own conclusions. We can't just rely on what people say is true or is not true. Let's look at all the data and let's think about it critically. So thank you for watching Expanded Knowledge. This is Anthony. Appreciate you. If you made it here, do appreciate the, hitting the thumbs up button and subscribing. If you're not a subscriber, just helps get the video out to more people, and definitely want to keep connecting with more people in this space and as this process unrolls. So thank you for watching. I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next one.